Yo, what's going on guys? It's G-Miners here. Today, I wanted to go over what team composition is going to be the best for running during contest mode in Witch Queen. I figured there were a lot of people who will be going for their first day 1 clear or are trying to get better placements, and having the right team comp is going to make a huge difference. I don't want to beat around the bush, so the team comp I'm going to recommend that most teams take into the raid is going to end up being a 4-1-1 with a prioritization on Warlocks. This means 4 Warlocks, 1 Hunter, and 1 Titan. If that is all you really need to know, then that's fine, but I'm going to be explaining why my team uses this team comp for day 1 clears and comparing it to other common team comps and going over kind of the pros and cons to each. This way, you can get an understanding of why we make certain decisions, and then you can adjust them if need be to better fit your own team. With day 1 clears, by far the biggest thing that your team, my team, the best teams, and every other team across the board is going to struggle with is going to be staying alive. Contest mode sets you 20 under power at every single encounter, which means things will hurt a lot. By far, the best class for staying alive is the Warlock. Right now, Warlocks trump almost every other class in terms of crowd control, self-healing, and team healing. This means you can actively control enemies to reduce the damage you take, heal yourself as you play, and support your teammates with health as they play too. Crowd control is mostly done with stasis turret builds, self-healing can be done with the Devour subclass, and team healing, which can also be used as self-healing, can be done with healing nades, rifts, and Well of Radiance. The only class that I would argue competes with the Warlock's crowd control when using Bleak Watchers is a top tree Night Stalker. The issue with this is that the Hunter needs to rely on using its super to compete. On top of this, as dominant as Tether is in endgame PvE, it is static. Once the Tether is down on the ground, that is where it stays, and it only affects enemies that are within its proximity. Bleak Watchers, on the other hand, may sit in one place, but can actively shoot enemies that are coming from different directions, even at far ranges. In terms of survivability, the Titan bubble can also compete with the Warlock's Well of Radiance, but at the end of the day, when you are in the bubble, you cannot shoot at enemies. Well of Radiance, on the other hand, allows you to stay alive while constantly dealing damage and clearing adds. Sure, you can dip into the bubble here and there to get overshields and weapons of light, but at the end of the day, Well is going to be much easier to use in endgame content. So with all this said, if Warlocks seem to beat out Hunters and Titans, why not just run 6 Warlocks? To be honest, a lot of teams have come to this same conclusion. In my opinion, however, there are a few reasons why having both 1 Titan and 1 Hunter is a good idea. When dealing damage to bosses, especially during contest mode, you are going to want all the extra damage you can get. Titan Bubble, as of right now, is the highest damage buff that players in Destiny 2 can receive. There are some options that are tied with the 35% that Weapons of Light provides, but none are as easy to use. Placing down a Titan Bubble slightly before or during a damage phase allows your entire team's damage to go up by 35%. If your team was just to damage inside of a Well of Radiance, you would only receive a 25% damage buff, so ultimately this is a 10% difference. Just like buffs, debuffs that are applied to bosses are equally as important. The debuff percentage gained from Tether is 30%. This is equivalent to using something like the Tractor Cannon, Melting Point, or even Shattering Strike. The difference is this debuff lasts much longer and is way easier to use at close and far ranges than most of these other options. Obviously, in seasons similar to the one that we are currently in, artifact mods are often available that allow for higher debuffs to be applied, like Particle Deconstruction. The issue with these debuffs for raiding during contest mode is, depending on the season, they may or may not even exist in the artifact. So typically, Bubble and Tether are going to be the easiest buff and debuff to use respectively. On top of this, if an artifact mod is present, there is a chance that certain classes are needed for stacking additional buffs. Focusing Lens this season used to be a perfect example of why running a Revenant Hunter was essential. Sure, Focusing Lens might not have been working as intended, but either way, you always want to prepare to have the highest damage multiplier possible. For these reasons, I don't think that running 6 Warlocks is going to be the best option. Before I continue along with the video, if you find this content useful, don't forget to drop a like and sub down below. Subbing is completely free, it helps me out a ton, and you can always change your mind later. Usually, when new subclasses or exotics are released, there can also be a huge shift in the meta in terms of DPS. For example, Behemoth Titans are extremely OP currently, and back when VoG was released for D2, many teams were thinking of running 6 Thunder Crashing Titans because of how strong Curus of the Falling Star was. In these cases, I would still recommend that most teams stick to something like a 4-1-1. The issue I see with running compositions purely for boss damage is that most teams will struggle to even reach a damage phase running 6 of the same class. This same thing even applies if Warlocks suddenly get a change or exotic that makes them the new DPS meta. Even with 6 Warlocks, not having a Titan Bubble or Tether available when going into a raid can be an issue. Bubble can be great in situations where you need to avoid being one-shot by bosses or majors. Tether, on the other hand, is great for extremely quick ad clear and suppressing enemies as well. Ultimately, you want to go into the raid fully prepared for anything that can exist in an encounter and not just build your team around dealing insane DPS. On top of this, in most cases, these 6-man DPS methods are extremely risky, require perfectly designed bosses to work, and won't deal impressive damage in activities when you are under power. The last option I think most people will also think of using is a 2-2-2 composition. This is 2 characters of each class. I also think that this is a great team comp and works well because it's extremely well balanced. The only issue I see with this goes back to the first point I made about staying alive. The 4-1-1 comp uses 4 Warlocks to help keep 6 people alive. This means each Warlock needs to support themselves and essentially half of one other person. What this really translates to is that 2 Warlocks can easily play around each other's rifts, healing nades, and Well of Radiance, and they can help support one other teammate with these as well. This is much easier to do than to have only 2 Warlocks trying to actively provide healing to themselves and for other players. Well chaining is another thing that makes Warlocks great. 2 players can easily do this using the Phoenix Protocol exotic chess piece. When your team splits into 2 teams of 3 for mechanics, this means that with 4 Warlocks, both teams can now easily always be in a well. Additionally, when splitting into 3 teams of 2, this will also guarantee that each team has a Warlock to help with survivability. These team splits are the most common that you will encounter on day 1, so this is another reason that 4 Warlocks is going to be better than 2. At the end of the day, everyone on your team most likely has someone that they prefer playing, so I would always work around this if possible. If you need to make any adjustments to your team, first, prioritize having more Warlocks if possible. Even if it is only 3 Warlocks as opposed to 4, this will still make a huge difference. Second, I would highly recommend not having any more than 2 Titans or 2 Hunters. I just don't see this as something that's necessary. 3, make sure that each player has a backup character that they can play on and will have ready for day 1 in case you need to change up your team composition last minute. Void 3.0 is coming with Witch Queen, which means that Titans and Hunters will most likely become much better in endgame PvE, as these subclasses are by far their best. Warlocks, on the other hand, will most likely not play much differently with Void 3.0, as Stasis and Well of Radiance are usually their better options. Anyways guys, that is all I have for this video. As always, if you have any questions or want any clarifications, don't hesitate to ask me in the comments below. Hope this video helps. Peace.